It's time for Truth, a ministry of Truth Family Bible Church in Middleton, Idaho. It's Time for Truth exists to glorify God through the edification of His saints in our local church and for the benefit of the church around the world. I'm your host, Pastor Danny Steinmeyer. Well, hello, everyone. Welcome once again to another exciting episode of the podcast. We are glad that you have joined us today, and we're looking forward to this episode. We've been looking forward to this opportunity for a while. Once again in studio, we have Pastor Gabe, Stone Mountain Baptist Church, and we also have our guest, but not a stranger to our church at all, our deacon, Senator Brandon Shippy. So, Brandon, welcome to the program once again.
Thank you, Danny.
Well, we are looking forward to this new opportunity also. This is our first episode as we are now a Truth Script podcast. So we are looking forward to our partnership once again with Truth Script. I am on the board of Truth Script, as well as now we are on YouTube. And so we are grateful to have that partnership and to expand perhaps some of the audience that we might have. And so thank you for joining us and welcome to this podcast. We hope that this is edifying for you as we seek to speak to the matters of the day and bring forth truth from God's Word to every area of life. And so today we have a fun, exciting episode to talk about the things that are happening in the state of Idaho and concerning certain legislation, as well as just getting to know certain things that are important to Brandon as a senator. And so we're looking forward to our conversation today. To start off with, Brandon, maybe if you could just share with us a little bit. We have an episode, but first of all, there's an episode of getting Brandon's testimony and some things about his life and his family and work and so forth, and how the Lord saved him and brought him to himself. You can go back and listen to that. You can get more of his life story. But today we want to start off with just talking about Brandon as a senator. So you won your primary, which was the big battle in a red state and in red district, wherein you when you win the Republican nomination, taking the seat formerly held by Abby Lee in District 9. You won your primary, and so then you won your general election by quite the landslide. And so that was wonderful and fun to see back in November. And so would you maybe just tell us a little bit about why you decided to become a senator and how it is that that you see yourself now in this role, having for the first time entered into politics?
Yeah, my background wasn't in politics at all. I grew up in Payette County. My family was there for generations and always very apolitical. I don't believe my grandfather was ever registered to vote, nor my father. They completely disengaged. The Shippy family completely disengaged in politics back in the late 1800s. Abraham Shippy was the last known Shippy in my line to be involved in politics, and he washed his hands of it and said it was all corrupt. And that was in the Oklahoma Territory, and he walked away from it, and the Shippys ever since have been very, very apolitical. And I started getting involved in politics a little bit back in 2018, and then more so in 2020 and 2021. Of course, there was so much going on with the COVID pandemic and how it was being handled, and rights were being trampled on, and so there was a lot of motivation to say we need to be involved before it feels like we need to be involved, rather than waiting and doing maintenance instead of just repairs, right? And so as things kind of seemed to normalize a little bit, started getting involved in 2021 in the local Republican Party in Payette County. The chairman of the party, Howard Rainierson, really kind of took me under his wing, I guess as you'd say, as far as in politics, and wanted to see me succeed. And so that was really helpful, kind of getting started there. Ran for precinct committeeman and then served in that role. Won my election in 2022. And then I actually won my election again in 2024 for that. I re-ran, obviously not knowing whether or not I'd win the Senate race. So I ran for both precinct committeeman and senator, and won the Senate race. So then served for a little while as a precinct committeeman, but then was appointed by the governor in July after Abby Lee had resigned July 1st. And so just had too much on my plate, resigned from precinct committeeman, and actually Ross Ills recently stepped up and filled my place because he's in our precinct, and so that was
he's in our church.
Yeah, he's in our church, so that was great to see him kind of step up and get involved in that way. And so starting then in July. As a senator, so now technically I'm on my second term. So I'm a second-term senator, even though this is my first session, right? So it was kind of interesting where it gave me seniority. It gave me incumbency. It gave me seniority in the Senate. So I'm actually ahead of 6 others in seniority, and the Senate really operates on a system seniority. So it really puts me in a kind of a unique place there. I'm really a freshman like everyone else, but on the books, I'm ahead of 2 former senators who are returning. And so that's really helpful for me as far as the life of the Senate. Was reelected in November, obviously with the general election, won by a landslide. I got 21,000 votes about, and the Democrat got about 4,200, I think. I said 21,000, I think is what I said, and not 2,100. Okay, I wasn't sure if I got the number, the digits there correct. And then was sworn in on December 5th, I believe it was. Went through kind of an orientation, get your feet under you, kind of get a little bit of a sense of how to draft bills and just how everything functions in general. And then fast forward to January 6th was the first day of session. So at noon, Senate convened. We organized and then sent a message to the governor that we were ready to do business. So we're organized and ready to do business. The House did the same thing, and then invited the governor to a State of the State address, which happens on the House floor. And then all the senators parade over in front of the cameras and so forth, and sat down in front with all the House members behind us. And so I'm sitting right down there in front of the governor, and while he's giving his State of the State address, and clapping and everything where you're supposed to clap and so forth, and kind of the whole thing. So that was an interesting experience. And then really from then, so now it's been 2 weeks, and a lot of it's announcements. The Senate floor sessions last 10 to 15 minutes. They're very short announcements from the governor, different appointments that he needs the Senate to confirm, and various messages from the House and so forth. So there's just a lot of business preparing, I guess, for different committees and so forth. One of the things where there really is not much on the Senate floor because nothing's really went through the committees yet. And then also there's a process where our bills constitutionally have to be read 3 times on the Senate floor before they can become law. And so what they get in line, and then every day we do readings of the bills across the Senate floor, and I think they have to do 3 different days as well. So there's a process, and so they have to come up 3 times before they're ready to be voted on. And so it's an old tradition, and that's a requirement in the Constitution. But what they do is they suspend the rules through unanimous consent to just read the bill, count the bill as read by just reading the title. Otherwise, you'd have to read the bill at length. That's what the Constitution actually requires. And because back in the day, most people were illiterate, and they didn't have any recordings. And so this allowed the public an opportunity to hear the bill being read and to be able to make comment, or at least know what was going to be created and made into law. So there's a lot of tradition. The Senate pretty much operates how it's operated since Idaho became a state from a territory.
So you're a incumbent senator entering your first legislative session, and with that, you were able to get on some committees. Would you let us know what committees are you on, and why are committee appointments valuable and important, and what do those committees mean to you?
Yeah, that's a great question. So in the Senate and in the House, there are subcommittees, or committees and then subcommittees, but there are committees that bills have to be introduced as a print hearing, and then it goes to a full committee hearing before usually 9 senators. The House has probably double that on their committees, maybe not quite, but close, a lot larger committees. And there are, taxation committees, health and welfare, state affairs, judiciary and rules, local govern tax, education. There are a bunch of different committees. And then whatever bills that are germane to that committee Anything dealing with education is going, education policy is going through the education committee. Tax policy is going through the tax committee. If it's a tax increase, it cannot originate in the Senate. It has to originate in the House. Those are constitutional requirements. But if it reduces taxation, it can be introduced in the Senate. And then you have state affairs is going to deal with maybe like your heaviest issues, your heart, I guess like big controversial issues, whatever that is really a hot topic maybe is going to likely be introduced into state affairs. So any abortion bill is going to be in state affairs. Any bill dealing with immigration is going to be in state affairs. So really any hot button issue is going to be there. And judiciary and rules is going to deal with issues like, the judicial system, the Idaho State Police, anything law enforcement related is going to go through judiciary and rules. And the importance of that, of course, is getting the right people on those committees so that when bills come in, either bad bills get killed or at least amended to where they're no longer a bad bill, or good bills get through and so forth. The committee selection process is different in the House than it is in the Senate. In the House, the Speaker of the House he has all authority to just give everyone their assignments. But in the Senate, it works on tradition, and it's on seniority. So you go through to the leadership, the office where the leadership is, and there's a board, and you get to choose 2 committees. And if you're the last, you're picking up the scraps, whatever's left, whatever's open. And so because I had a little bit higher seniority than some, I was able to go through, and I kind of had my pick. I could have been on the Joint Financial Action Appropriation Committee, JFAC we call it, right? So I could have been on that. I could have been on education. I had a lot of choices. I was invited by the chairman of Judiciary and Rules, Senator Todd Lakey, which is your senator, Danny. Mm-hmm. And I thought it would be wise if a chairman asked you, hey, you should be on my committee, to accept that, because you're probably going to work well with them. They want to see you succeed, right? They see something in you that they think they can mentor, and they can help grow and help you be successful. So I thought, well, that's probably a good move. So
sometimes it's helpful to go where you're wanted.
Yes, right? Exactly. Absolutely. I think that you summarized that well. So I chose to be on there, and we knew that I wanted to be on health and welfare. That was a big one for me, because of our background in foster care and adoption, and just a lot of issues that we care about. But health and welfare tends to not fill up. It's a heavier lifting committee. They meet 4 days a week, where most other committees are meeting 2 or maybe 3 days a week, different staggering days and at different times. And then they deal with a lot of issues. So it's a busy committee. A lot of people don't want to be on it. So I held off on that one. And I went in, I chose Judiciary and Rules. And then the interesting thing was, when I first walked into the room, the State Affairs Committee is a leadership committee. So all leadership is on it, plus a couple of extra people, and it's an invite only. You cannot choose to be on that one. And when I walked in the room, the pro tempore said, we would like to invite you to be on State Affairs.
Wonderful. That's awesome.
And so I thought, I can't pass it up.
That's right.
So I accepted that. And so historically, Democrats have had 2 seats on there, and the Republicans have had 7. And because the Democrats lost a seat in the Senate overall, it gave them less percentage. So there were a number of committees. Health and welfare, they have 1 member on there, and then on state affairs they have 1 member, and I think JFAC they have 1 member. So it reduced their percentage of being on there. So that was helpful as far as because there was an extra spot. Yeah, so an extra spot essentially was made to invite me on there. So that was pretty big. And then subsequently then was appointed to be vice chair of Judiciary and Rules. And so that was really cool as well. That gives me the responsibility to review rules. So the vice chair is responsible for the rules. So every year, all the agencies of the germane committees bring their rules for review. And so we have the ability to strike out rules that we don't like. And I'm in charge of chairing the meeting. And so we're dealing with ISP rules, Veteran Affairs rules, and Department of Corrections rules. And I think a couple of other departments. And we're just about through those. We'll finish those on Monday. And so that's been a good learning experience. And then on health and welfare, we're doing health and welfare rules and various other agencies as well. and the state of fair we deal with rules as well. One of the things that was really interesting, I'll just touch on real quick, and I put it out on Facebook, maybe you saw it, that foster parents are required to lock up your guns and your ammunition in separate locations, which essentially disarms you. And I brought this up in the Health and Welfare Committee, and it kind of caught everyone off guard. And I said, as a foster parent, which makes you more vulnerable than any other family out there, because there are some dangerous situations where, some family members maybe are upset, or the boyfriend or the mom or the kids gets upset, and you're in a vulnerable place. And now you're forcing foster parents to really put themselves out there. And that's public knowledge that if somebody finds out you're a foster family, they're going to know you're disarmed also. And so, we didn't strike the rule, but we're actually working on some legislation to fix the issue. And I think we landed in a sweet spot on this. I've been working with Director Alex Adams on it, and he's super happy to work with me on it. So I'm really excited about that. And in fact, the Assistant Majority Leader asked to co-author the bill with me. And so that bill should go through really easy. And that's going to make... that's going to really open up foster care to a lot of people, where right now there are a lot of people that are saying, I would never do foster care. And the biggest issue is we can't recruit. No one wants to do it. And so I think this is a barrier. It's going to remove that barrier, and it's going to protect Second Amendment rights, and it's going to put that responsibility on the parents, the foster parents. And we're going to put up some safeguards that we think are responsible, but yet they're not intrusive. And it's really...
trying to maximize freedom.
Maximize freedom and empower foster parents to be able to defend their own homes.
Well, I think that's huge. I saw you post that, and I was reading it, and it really struck me. I was like, so functionally, we have Idahoans that are living like they're in California because they're trying to do good. That seems really odd.
Absolutely.
To put them in a position of essentially inferiority as citizens in our own state because they're trying to serve the state. This struck me as odd. So I appreciated you recognizing that and doing something about it.
Absolutely. And I think this legislation, we'll see. It may face opposition, but I don't think it's going to really face any. It seems like I have all the right people on my side on this one, so this should be pretty easy to get this one through. So that was something that I was not anticipating even seeing, but having brought it up, then it's like, we have to do something right now. Strike while the iron's hot. Everybody on the committee, once I brought it up, they're ready to strike the rule right there. I'd won them all over, but I don't think it was the right move. I think doing what we're doing now is going to be the better move.
Provide greater clarity and protections for the future. Right.
Yep. Because in the moment, it would have been pretty rough to make that decision right then. We had a day or two to think about it, and I think we're going to bring a lot better legislation than what we would have done if we'd have just struck it in the meeting. So anyway.
No, that's good. Well, another major one that we wanted to talk with you about is one that's near and dear to the hearts of both of our churches. It's a distinctive in our church that we believe in the abolition of abortion. Likewise. That we see that there is just major issues with unjust approaches towards the issue of abortion, especially. It just strikes me when you speak to the legislation, or excuse me, the legislature and the committees being so dominated. We are a very red state, very red state, and yet abortion remains legal in Idaho. And so the issue of how to deal properly with abortion, and one of the things that you're not seeing this right now, we don't have video for our YouTube feed yet. We do have faces for radio, at least I do.
Hey now.
And
fair.
At least I do. Yes, at least I do.
We're both bald. It's okay. Brandon's the only one with hair here.
And but Brandon actually has a pin that he is wearing on his tie that is an Abolish Human Abortion pin. And so these are values that are important to our church. And there's a longer story about how that came about for us and kind of how we got brought to that. Yeah. But ultimately, it's something that's, of course, also near and dear to Brandon's heart as well. And so one of the elements of being a senator is the opportunity to pursue justice for the preborn. Absolutely. And so you are presenting a bill. You have a bill that has been drafted and that you are working towards moving forward in the legislature. Would you comment on your bill of equal protection? Would you explain a little bit first what the bill is, what the bill does, and what makes that important or distinctive from other bills? I mean, Roe v. Wade was overturned. Why are we still doing this? Well, maybe you can explain a little bit of why this bill is important and what distinguishes it from other pieces of legislation, and we'll take the conversation from there.
Yes, when you talk to a lot of people, they will say, "Hey, we're a really pro-life state. We've made a lot of progress in the past 30 years or the last 40 years. We've banned abortions. We don't really need to do anything more, or we're in a really good spot, and so let's focus on other important issues." That's where a lot of the mindset is right now. And so when I bring up the issue of, hey, we need another abortion bill, they're like, why are we doing this? We actually, we're being told we should probably stand down. The attorney general's having to deal with another lawsuit that St. Luke's just brought, and the governor really wants us to stand down as well, and let's deal with other issues. And I brought this legislation because there is not equal justice and equal protection in our current abortion laws. In fact, the issue that we're even mentioning the term abortion betrays that we misunderstand the issue.
That's right.
Because the issue is not about abortion. The issue is about homicide.
Yes.
The issue is about homicide, the intentional killing of an innocent preborn child. That's what the issue is about. And so I'm going to start with where we are as of today.
Okay.
We'll start with where we are as of today, and then we're going to kind of go down, peel back the layers a little bit. And I think if we start here, is going to be helpful for where we're going. So I have a bill that I'm trying to introduce. It has an RS. It's been drafted. The language is all how we want it. It's ready to go. I just need a print hearing. I've been trying to get a print hearing. That print hearing so far has been not denied, but has been not scheduled, let's say, for various reasons that are seemingly unknown. Some of them are known. Let me just say the chairman of the committee is not very excited about the bill, and feels that our abortion laws are actually have gone too far, and he would like to see maybe some other exceptions added, such as the health of the mother, and a few other exceptions added to the law, and really doesn't want to see us to go the other direction. And so he's not very excited about it. There's another good senator who is wanting to bring another bill himself, and he's brought it a couple of times. And his bill, what it does is it just removes, I haven't seen the language, but it removes the rape exception in our current Idaho laws. And I have already told this other senator that if his bill were to come before me, I would oppose the bill. And right now there's a conversation happening where they're saying, hey, we if we have redundancy, we have 5 senators all bringing the same thing. Maybe they're slightly different. We need to get them together and work it out and say, hey, just bring one because we don't need to have 5 of the same bills. I get that. That makes sense.
Sure.
And so how
That's
this is
reasonable.
being viewed right now is that Senator Shippy and this other senator they're bringing kind of the similar bills, and maybe you guys need to work it out. That's what's being spoken. And so I actually had a conversation with leadership earlier today and was explaining they are not the same bill. In fact, I would be just as opposed to removing the rape exception under our current abortion ban laws as I would be of adding the health of the mother exception. And the reason why is that our current laws in Idaho are built upon the premises, the assumption that the state of Idaho has the authority in the legislature to grant the right to life, to assign value to human beings,
Well said.
and they have no right or authority to do that. The fundamental issue here is not how can we remove the current exceptions that are in the law, or how can we just tighten it up. The fundamental issue we're dealing with here is the dehumanization of the baby in the womb. The preborn child has been dehumanized. And until that is corrected, you will never fix the problem. So when people say we've made progress, I would argue it's not progress. On some level, we could say that some babies have been protected better than maybe they were before, such as, let's say, a bald eagle is protected more than a coyote. They have a little more protections in the law, but both of them are still animals. They're still treated as animals. One has a few more protections than the other. But the fundamental issue is the baby in the womb equally human to everyone else? If it is, then it deserves to have the same protections that you and I have under the law. That is the main issue. And so our current abortion ban laws, if you read through it dehumanizes the baby in the womb. Number one, any criminal penalties surrounding killing a preborn child. The doctor gets a maximum of 5 years. I think a minimum of 3. They lose their license and like a $10,000 fine. I could, don't quote me on the
But you're in the ballpark.
Yeah. Just to give you an idea.
Yeah.
So number one, if we were to apply that same standard to someone who, let's say a doctor intentionally murdered a 3-year-old boy. Mm-hmm. If those were applied, that would be unjust. We would say, no, he needs to have the same penalty that you would apply to anyone else. Like, it would be absurd. Why? Because we believe in the equal humanity of the 3-year-old as to maybe the adult. Right. But we're denying the equal humanity by setting different standards. We're applying different weights and measures. The other thing is that in Idaho, the Idaho abortion ban laws, it just universally exempts women from any prosecution. Yeah. And some would say, well, isn't that good? Because women should be protected because they might be vulnerable in this situation. And I get many cases they might be vulnerable. They might be coerced. There might be all kinds of scenarios and situations where they find themselves in. The problem is to provide blanket immunity to women, to say that they are never to be held accountable for their crimes, for their actions.
When this is murder.
This is homicide. Mm-hmm. This is murder. And so if you were to say that some of the actors should always have immunity from prosecution of any sort, they cannot be held culpable, what you're actually doing is you are dehumanizing them on some level. Why do I say that? Because what is the mechanism? What is the standard by which we hold anyone accountable for their crimes? We don't hold a dog accountable to the same degree that we would hold a human being accountable. Why? Human beings have moral agency, and it's tied directly to their humanity. So to exempt women from any accountability ever, as just a blanket immunity without any judgment involved in each situation, because each situation is different, to provide that, what you're doing is you're denying one of two things. Number one, you're either denying their intelligence and their ability to understand the reality they live in. And you're saying that they cannot be capable of that. And you're saying that at a high level, that not, hey, in this situation she wasn't capable, but you're saying no woman is capable of that. And what you're doing is you're actually destroying the equality of women, and you're degrading women and disrespecting them. You're saying they don't have moral agency, which is tied directly to their humanity. And so you're degrading and despising women when you think you're maybe helping them. And so it actually is going the other direction. And so that's another...
It's patronizing.
That's what it does. But I believe fundamentally it dehumanizes because it denies her moral agency. It does not treat her, it does not give her the same recognition under the legal system as it would a man, or at least we would say mothers in this case.
Well, you just brought up you just touched on that inconsistency. And so what you're bringing here is a law that actually brings about consistency in recognizing the humanity of the child, as well as what you're talking about too, in the people involved in the homicide. So you brought up the fact that the man was treated differently. I've brought up, and when I wrote my senators and when I wrote the senators on the committee, I highlighted the fact of Idaho law that a man who murders a pregnant woman, so he murders the woman and the preborn child, he's charged with double murder. So the child, the baby, is recognized as a human being whose right to life has been violated. The man is charged with double murder. So he has moral agency and he has moral accountability for his actions in taking the innocent life of both the mother and the child. And none of us would say, oh, well, let's make it even and let's make sure that the man isn't responsible for the murder of the baby. No, we say rightfully so. The man is responsible. He gets charged with double murder, and that's right and proper. What you just pointing out here is the significant inconsistency, but really the immorality of dehumanizing the woman in saying you can't be responsible for the homicide that you intentionally pursued on the child in your womb. That's odd, it's strange, it's wrong to treat men and women differently in that way when we're dealing with the same human child in the womb, right? And I think that's an important element of equal protection and the equality of men and women treated in the way in which they're treated criminally for the same act, right?
Well, and I appreciate you using the language of homicide just as a framework in general, because when you start using language like homicide and you actually admit that it is murder that's occurring, that invokes the existing law. We already have law to deal with homicide. And so part of the plague of a lot of pro-life legislation is that it tries to treat it as a completely separate category. And so I appreciate your consistency there in applying existing homicide laws. So you mentioned, not wanting to try the woman for any sort of penalty. That's just wildly inconsistent, because essentially what we're doing is we're trying to legislate based on an exception rather than the rule. We're saying, well, there is this weird case where, well, maybe she was coerced into it and we don't want her to be penalized wrongly. Well, that's foolish, because that's assuming that we don't have due process already established. That's assuming that would happen. No, well, if that were to happen, she would go before a jury or a judge, and they would hear the case. They would establish, oh, you were coerced, and she would not be found guilty. That's what we already have existing case law for. And so it's a wild assumption to say, well, this necessarily will happen, therefore we're going to make them all immune. And especially when you take into account statistics that are easily, findable online, that we know that the vast majority of abortions are elective, right? So, and oftentimes that isn't the case. So I appreciate you using that language, because if you were to pass this bill, it's actually going to protect women in a way, because you're also going to be able to hold them accountable. So when there is a time where someone was coerced, or there are other factors that came into, or maybe there was even exemptions in the sense of mental faculties or mental capabilities, like we already have laws established that if someone is not functionally able to be aware of what they're doing, that there are protections, etc. Like we already have that existing. And so all you're saying is, let's treat all homicide as homicide. That's it. And I love that, because it's a framework issue.
All victims and all perpetrators are treated equally under the law. And that's what this law is about, right?
And that's what I'm after. And the issue, furthermore, in our Idaho abortion laws or abortion ban laws, the other issue is that it provides for these various exceptions. And these exceptions are, there are significant issues, but they are arbitrary in their, in how laws are provided to protect life. And so we have, let's say, the rape one is kind of a probably the major one that people want to talk about, the rape exception. And it's, why would you make a woman go through a pregnancy that you're forcing her to carry this rapist baby and so forth. On one hand, you're forgetting, of course, that this is also her child. Yeah. And just as much as his child, this was not her choice. Obviously, that's a tragic, heinous event, and it's a crime. And it's a crime. It should, he should be punished.
Yeah, so penalize the father,
he should
not
be,
the child, right?
Exactly. So you don't punish the child for the sins of the father. But beyond that, if excuse me, the issue is very fundamental. Is that a human being? If the answer is yes, then it has a God-given right to life, equal to anyone else.
That's right.
Our right to life is not dependent on our external circumstances.
Yeah.
If that is the principle by which we work, and as a legislator, I have to work from principle. I can't arbitrarily assign value to somebody because of external circumstances. But yet, that's what our laws do. And so, this other senator who has proposed to remove the rape exception, the reason why I cannot support that and would oppose that is because it continues to work within a framework. It continues to perpetuate the idea that the legislature has the authority to assign value. And so what it's doing is it's simply saying, today we're going to assign value to the babies conceived in rape. Yeah. And that's all it's doing. And here's the thing. At the end of the day, there are really not any babies being aborted in Idaho who are conceived in rape. It's not really an issue, actually. And so it's not even making so-called progress. You're perpetuating the idea that the legislature has this authority. So until you come back to the drawing board and say, we're going to approach it from an actual moral and principled and constitutional standpoint, you're not doing anything. You're just moving pieces around on the board, and that's all you're doing. You're saying, my opinion says that I don't think women who are raped should kill their children. The other one says, well, I think women who have a health issue should be okay to do that. My opinion versus your opinion. And in the Idaho Constitution, it says that all men are created equal and they all have certain inalienable rights.
Right.
That is a constitutional recognition that we all have these rights.
Not just in Idaho, but the entire country.
Absolutely.
And the idea, though, is that those rights are inherent. They come from God by virtue of being made in his image. Yes. So therefore, a government cannot grant value, nor can they take it away. Yes. It is inherent in who they are as a human being.
Constitutions do not grant you rights. They recognize rights. And so the value that we have, the life that we have is given by God, and the value is recognized in the Constitution, and it's equal among all. And that's the framework that we have to approach this. So I cannot support a bill that is seeking to further restrict abortion if it's built upon the wrong premises and perpetuates the same lies about the baby in the womb, which that is subhuman. It's something other that we can simply regulate and work within this immoral framework. And so the bill that I have brought, it's an RS. It has yet to get a bill number, so it's technically not a bill. It's just an RS at this point. So forgive me, I'm calling it a bill. That's the goal, of course, is to get it to be a bill.
I like your optimism.
What it does is it goes back to the drawing board. We completely ignore our existing abortion ban laws, the heartbeat bills and so forth. We just that went through. We completely ignore them. We go back to the basics. In our homicide code, it already defines a baby in the womb as fully human. It gives them equal protection, as you mentioned. Mm-hmm. If someone were to murder a pregnant woman, they get charged with 2 counts of murder. Or they could be charged with 2 counts of murder.
Well, and they have been. In
Idaho,
they have been. It's not like they haven't used that, or like we don't recognize that. It's actually been done.
There's a man serving 2 life sentences in northern Idaho for ice picking his pregnant wife, and that is a reality. So, in that same homicide code, it also grants if the mother consents to the homicide, then she and the doctor are fully exempt from any prosecution. And so, what our bill does is it repeals that code, so that it removes that clause, which I believe is dehumanizing and degrading to women, but it also removes the protection for the preborn. And so if we remove that, it repeals that, and then our bill goes in further, and it provides better definition for preborn children. And what we actually do is we define it as that they are a human being. A preborn child is defined as a person from the moment of fertilization.
Excellent.
And so we want to use those terms because it also does apply. This will affect IVF because those are then defined with personhood and then are granted equal protection under the law, and they cannot be destroyed unjustly.
Absolutely.
And so it applies to them. And, people want to get into the weeds. What about ectopic pregnancy? What about, all these various things?
Birth control.
The issue, what about birth control? The issue is if what you're practicing intentionally kills a preborn child, this law will affect what you're doing. This only applies to the intentional killing of a preborn child. That's all this law applies to. It doesn't apply to what if the baby's already deceased and the doctor needs to remove it. That doesn't apply to that. And we address that in the bill as well. If it doesn't even apply to an issue where there's a mom who is dying because of some complication, or she is potentially dying, or not. It doesn't
need to deliver the baby.
Yes,
early,
it doesn't necessarily need to be dying, but in the opinion of the good faith opinion of the doctor that her life is in jeopardy. They need to deliver the baby early, and there's an unintentional death of the baby caused. That is not homicide.
I appreciate you saying that, right? Delivering a baby and then it dying of natural causes is not the same as dismembering it, burning it, poisoning it in the womb.
It's treated as a patient. Everything is done to try to keep the baby alive. Treat it as a human being, as you would any other human being. It's tragically going to pass away if it's at a certain stage of development or maybe whatever it might be. But the issue is, we do not have the right to intentionally kill a preborn child. And that's the issue. Yeah, and so it's a simple issue. If a doctor in good faith says we have to perform this medical procedure and deliver the baby, remove the baby, whatever we have to do. But if the goal is to save life, it's not treated as homicide. It's a very simple thing. The medical community, unfortunately, have tried to complicate the issue. They try to say, well, we don't really understand what we can or can't do. There was that situation in Georgia where a mom had taken some abortion pills and killed her child already. She couldn't then pass the child, so she goes in and they said, well, we don't really know if we can do anything under current Georgia law. And so they wait until the mom has sepsis and she passes away. And that was evil. That was malpractice. That was malpractice. I mean, there was no question under the law that they were completely they had complete access to do whatever they need to do to preserve her life.
The procedure isn't banned. The murder is banned.
Yeah, and so that's the only question they have to answer is: are you intentionally killing a preborn child? That's the only question they have to answer under this law. And it's a very simple approach. We also add in there some protections that would apply if somebody was being forced or coerced by like a pimp or a sex trafficker. So it would help give her some protections there as well. And then we also remove some exceptions from the assault and battery law, where if you harm a baby in the womb, you could be charged with assault and battery unless the mom decides she wants it done, and then the doctor and the mom are exempt. So we remove that as well. Cool. And so just trying to clean things up, and then this also would supersede existing abortion laws. So essentially...
they're not needed.
Right, exactly. This would supersede them. And obviously, eventually, I would like to see them at some point removed. We're just ignoring them at this point. But this just brings it back to the fundamental truth that baby is a whole human being as anyone else and deserves equal protection under the law. And it's a really, really simple thing. And we've so complicated it that it's hard to even have these conversations. And so we'll just take one little step. That's not a step.
Yeah.
That's not a step, because the issue is you're on a different level than where you're supposed to be. You're supposed to be treated as a human being.
Is God's law simple?
It's actually very simple.
You shall not murder.
Mm-hmm.
There's a very ease and simplicity of that. And so we've tried to turn it into these gymnastic twists and turns and pretzels and all these sort of things that we've tried to make it more complicated. But what I appreciate about this approach and recognizing the equal protection concept is the reality that human beings are human beings, and you don't get to take their life when they're innocent like that. And so really helpful and important part.
Can you, or what were you going to say?
Yeah, so I was talking about the issue of, or the term equal protection. I use the term equal protection all the time, and I actually find myself rarely using the term abolition or abolish. And maybe it's strategic, but maybe it's not. I think there are some negative feelings that some people have when they hear the word abolition. I don't personally have a problem with it. I'm wearing a pin that says AHA. And I get asked almost daily, hey, what does that stand for? And so it's a good conversation starter. But honestly, I try to use terms that are more accurate to what I'm after. And so even if we were to pass laws where they were just and provided equal protection, you wouldn't abolish abortion, just like we haven't abolished murder. Because it would still happen criminally or illegally, let's say. It's always criminal, but it would happen illegally. Right. So I try to use a term where I'm after equal protection. Yep. And so I think it actually conveys to a greater extent what I'm after is that I want the baby in the womb, the preborn, to be treated equally the same as you and I are treated under the law. Yep. And that's all I'm asking. I'm not asking for us to go down all these rabbit trails. Let's just provide them equal protection, and then as the situations come up, it's dealt with in judicial decisions. I mean, that if a woman has her preborn child or poisons her preborn child, and it's discovered and goes through the regular process, that if someone were to put poison in her baby's bottle and poison her child, it would go through a process of investigation. She would get to appear before a jury of her peers. And on all these things. Now, I mean, a lot of this stuff would happen in private, so it would be hard to discover if a woman actually committed, poisoning her child or those type of things.
You don't base the law on whether or not it's going to be easy to enforce.
Exactly.
You base it on whether or not it's just.
Exactly. So the issue is not, hey, we need to create some sort of surveillance state. That's not what I'm pushing at all.
Right.
It's just that the same laws that protect you and I should protect them, and that's that. I mean, that it doesn't really even need to go beyond that.
So it sounds very common sense. Sounds very something that, Republicans who run
should support,
who run constantly on the life issue and would say that they are quote unquote pro-life, and all these things. I mean, look, your committee is stacked with Republicans. It's 8-1 in your committee. We have super majorities in the House and in the Senate. We have a Republican governor, and yet, Brandon, tell us about where this bill is and why this is not just a very easy fight, not only in our state but in many other states in the union. What is the problem here, or what are we facing with this bill? You had another bill that sounded like it's going to possibly sail through. You feel very confident that we love the ability to have our guns. Why would a bill of equal protection, what sounds so very common sense, to protect the lives of human beings made in the image and likeness of God, where are we at, and where is this going? And maybe just give us an update as to what's going on and what we're facing.
I contribute part of our struggle to get a bill like this through to the sins of our fathers, because no one has approached this from a truth perspective, from a constitutional perspective, from a right to life perspective. Even though that term is used, it's not approached from that foundation. And so what has happened is they've approached it from the foundation that that government is involved is in the business of ascribing value, as I mentioned earlier. They get to regulate, they get to assign value, determine who gets to live and who doesn't, and so forth. Because we've gone down this road far enough, on one level, you can't even hardly have the conversation about this. There are some folks in the legislature that understand the issue. As far as being able to explain it to them, they understand what I'm saying and where I'm coming from. They're able to wrap their head around it. I would say, one, there is a barrier in theology.
Yeah.
So, number one, we have a lot of LDS members. I'm going to call them out on this, right? I don't have any problem doing that. We have a lot of LDS members who they receive direction from their prophet and from their church's position, their official position on their website. You can search it up, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints on abortion, and you can find a couple of articles, and they very clearly spell out where we believe in the sanctity of life. We are against all elective abortions, except we believe that women who are raped should have the right to get an abortion if we don't believe that she necessarily has to, but if she has, if she prays about it and receives confirmation in her spirit, she can go through with an abortion in the case of rape or incest. They also list on there the health of the mother and the life of the mother, and then whenever a baby is deemed as non-viable, meaning that it's not going to live anyways, so you can just terminate it and start over. That's their type of language and understanding. So there are certain senators that would really like to see Idaho go that direction and even make it a little more accessible, you might would say, to women who are seeking abortion for the health of the mother. And here's what I would say. Here's what I would say about an LDS senator who wants to do that, is they at least have some justification for wanting to do that because their theology informs them of that. But what about the Christians, the evangelicals, the Protestants, such as myself, who also agree with them? What about those guys who are not pushing for what is your theology? What is your justification? And so I think that's one of the major issues is the LDS Church teaches that. And so that's a big hurdle to overcome, is that the hurdle is simply this. The LDS Church also believes in the inspiration of the Constitution. So my argument is, if the Constitution is inspired, then let's look to the Constitution for instructions on this. What does it say? All men are created equal. If all men are equal and the law in the 14th Amendment is to be applied equally to all, that is the approach we have to take. And that's my argument to them, is I don't argue whether their prophet had the word from God. I argue the Constitution.
Yeah, even using your own framework, you're self-refuting.
Their own framework does instruct them to provide equal justice for the preborn. in spite of.
So you're pointing out their own inconsistency.
Exactly. And many of them realize that. So I think to a large degree, that's why we perpetuate where we are. And when I see evangelicals, Protestants trying to just kind of move the pieces around a little bit, you're never going to win that fight because you're agreeing with them on certain premises that the legislature has the authority to determine these things. And you have to come back to that foundational reality that all human beings are created in the image of God and have inherent right to life, and it's to be protected, and laws are to be applied equally to all without discrimination. And as far as where do we go from here?
I'm going to pause you for a second. Let's come back to that, if you don't mind. I want to go back to the issue. We see where a lot of LDS legislators will be on that because of, you explained that well.
By default.
But let's go back to the issue of the theological underpinnings and foundations, the sins of the fathers that relate to evangelical Christians and many of them in the legislature. For instance, I don't need to necessarily mention names right now, but I'm thinking of a particular person in the House side who has basically vowed to kill any bill that is going to provide equal protection and equal accountability for this matter. And this is a professing evangelical Christian wherein he is known as an evangelical Christian, a member of a church, involved in Christian education, and yet he actually, so this is a Christian man standing in the way of this sort of reason and theological application. And then he's, of course, not nearly alone. There are many people who would profess to be Christians who are not on board with this. And I think this gets to a weakness and a failure in our local churches, a failure of pastors and leaders to declare the truth. So, for instance, this upcoming Sunday is very important to us. It's Sanctity of Life Sunday. And I will be bringing a message on justice and only justice, Deuteronomy 16, and trying to educate and speak to the matter. We have a dearth of teaching on theology and on subjects that really apply a biblical worldview to every area of life. And so churches, we've got to get back on track on this. Folks, if you're in a church that your pastors and your people that you worship with don't have a grasp of this, lovingly, patiently, but intently and earnestly seek to help them and educate them on this subject. Put them in touch with other pastors and share this podcast around with other folks so they learn and understand. Because I think a lot of Christians, for us, I didn't know about abolition. I didn't understand the issues, but once I did. It was like falling off a log. Like you said, a lot of people, when you tell them about it, they track with you and they get it. They do understand it. Besides the issue of politics and optics and republicanism versus democratism, right? Of power and of popularity and so forth, we have an issue in the church that we need to deal with. And so, as you said, there's a theological issue underpinning that the sins or the neglect of the churches, of our fathers, to lead Christians who are in public service to have their worldview correct, to have their worldview ordered biblically, is a problem. And so we have to work with that. And so there's a lot of re-discipleship or new discipleship in this matter that's needed. So, Gabe, you want to comment, and we'll get back to Brandon?
Yeah, absolutely. I think a large part of that is also just sort of the general defeatism that has been in the church, just sort of a general pessimism, whether that's eschatologically or just maybe an overemphasis on the separation of church from the world, right? And so piety becomes pietism real quickly. And what ends up happening, I think, is that we have failed to speak consistently to the sin of this issue. And as a result, a lot of Christians have just sort of washed their hands of politics. You mentioned the apoliticalness of your own family history. I've experienced that in my own family to a certain degree. And so rather than engaging in the state, we're like, well, we don't want to bring the law to bear. We're all about the gospel. We're all about the Great Commission. And so we sort of do that Jesus juke thing where we think we're saying something good and pious and true, and it is. But you also, sir, I'll remind you, have an obligation under God, according to his word, to deal justly, Read Romans 13, right? The second use of God's law is to restrain evil, which points back to the first use of the law. It instructs the people of their need of a savior, right? So you have an obligation as a senator to bring forth righteous decrees that inform the citizenship of what is wrong. And when we already recognize murder is evil, right? Even if you were to take religion out of the argument, we as a people in Idaho recognize homicide to be a crime and it to be evil and wrong, right? So you are trying to simply standardize and set equal weights and measures. And that's it. And so theologically speaking, as Christians, we are guilty of unequal weights and unequal measures, and God hates that, he says. And so I really appreciate your desire to bring that consistency, but we as pastors, I think, have a huge role to play in informing our people that it's actually good and righteous for Christians to pursue. So feel free to comment on this as well, but some people may even take issue with, well, why do Christians want to try and have power and authority in the first place? I think it's actually good and right because of what I just said a minute ago. We want to restrain evil, promote the good, and point people to the gospel. One of the big reasons why we have to have penalties for women is otherwise, how do you preach them the gospel, right? If you say to them, you are immune, you did no wrong, what am I telling them to repent of as a pastor? I'm saying you're not guilty under the law of man, but well, you are guilty under the law of God. It creates an unnecessary division. So I think that is a failing of the church, and that we have promoted that and we've enabled that. And because of that sort of defeatism and separation mentality, we've opened the door now where we find ourselves handcuffed. I think a lot of these Christian legislators, I have relationships with some of them. I've worked with some of them. I've had these conversations with them, respectable men in general speaking, that deserve the honor of the office they hold. But I think at the end of the day, some of these men genuinely just feel handcuffed, that they can't speak as honestly as they want to because, well, this deal won't go through, or they won't vote for that bill, and all that backdoor sort of stuff. We need to, as pastors, I think, speak prophetically to these men in office and say, look, you need to be a Christian. When the centurion became a Christian, he didn't quit being a centurion. He became a Christian centurion. You have an obligation to be a Christian Republican, a Christian senator. And if you're not going to consistently honor God's word, then frankly speaking, we as the people need to replace them with men who will. And that's a hard word. And that's our job as, I think, prophets, as pastors, to speak prophetically to our lawmakers. But that means we also need men like yourself, willing to give them an example of what that looks like. And that's no small feat. So I appreciate your willingness to pursue that. And we definitely want to know how we can support.
We'll come back to that, but go ahead. You were going to continue.
Yeah, I think the biggest question is, what now? What do you do now? Where do you go from here? Often the response is, you're not going to get it through. You're not going to have the votes. Why even push for a print hearing? Why even push for a committee hearing if you're not going to get it passed through the floor? You're not going to get a hearing on the House side. Why would you even bother? You're putting other senators at risk of being on the record of this, or whatever it might be that somebody brings up an excuse of why you shouldn't do this.
If you don't want to be at risk, vote for it.
Right? If it's not, you might would say if I'm going to head up to Stanley, Idaho, and I know I'm not going to make it, but why even start the journey, right? What's the point? And the issue is that why not run something that you think might get through? Chip away, use something smaller, remove an exception, right? That's the argument. The problem is, until we start speaking the truth, we don't actually make real progress. So that's why a bill of equal protection, because what it does is the progress it makes is it starts the conversation about the fundamental issues that we're facing with life. Otherwise, you perpetuate the same problems year after year after year, and you will never make actual progress.
But there is great money and there is great political power to be had by perpetuating the problem. And so if you get rid of the problem, you get rid of a lot of money and a lot of look. What are Republicans going to run on if they can't run on pro-life? Fiscal responsibility? yeah, right. Right. So I think it's really important.
The grocery tax, that's what they got.
What you said is very important, Brandon. I appreciate that, right? The issue is truth. The issue is speaking the truth and doing what is right. And then ultimately, I think another aspect there is the trusting in the sovereignty of God, ultimately acknowledging Him and doing, and what Gabe said, doing justice, pursuing justice. This is a pursuit of justice. This is what we are called.
conscience.
This is what we're called to do. And this is the problem, especially with the issue of life. All these half measures and footsie with the issue are actually unjust. They're actually prolonging the injustice of our state and the lives of these preborn image bearers of God are put at risk and are treated improperly. And so, very important. The success ultimately belongs to the Lord. And so we acknowledge that whether on paper, whether to the eyes of statisticians and pollsters, this has a chance. It's not whether or not it has a chance. The question is it right?
Yeah.
Right?
It's God determines or sets the parameters of what his goals are for us, and then he also shows us by what means we're to arrive at that. And so I try to use the example when arguing against somebody's position of unjust, unrighteous incrementalism. Hey, we just have to take little steps at a time. I'm not opposed to incrementalism as long as they are righteous steps. If they're small steps, I'm okay with that, but righteous incrementalism. And so if you consider just the idea of, as men, we are required before God to provide for our families, does that then open up all avenues of provision? Are we allowed to, in whatever way that we see fit, especially ways that arrive to the goal quicker, are actually preferred? The harder ways are maybe less desirable, so let's not take those. But no, God says, here's where to go, and then he gives you a narrow path to get there. And I believe it's the same thing when it comes to the issue of life, legislation surrounding the issue of life, is that he says, here's the goal, but here's the path. And so you will see me voting probably against all kinds of pro-life legislation because if it's got inherent injustice in it, I intend on voting no on it. There might be some legislation that is incremental steps on some sort of issue that if I can determine that it is a just or righteous step, I would probably support it, depending on what the issue is. But to me, it's also faith. I had somebody the other day say, well, we made such progress in the past 40 years. I mean, think about where we would have been if we wouldn't have tried at all, or if we would have just, tried to always just run a just bill. And they didn't use the term just bill. I'm putting words in their mouth there, but it's the same thing. And my answer is, I can say just as much that if that had happened, we would have just laws today, because through obedience, God would have blessed. Now, God knows the answer to that. I'm guessing at this point. I don't know what would have happened, and it didn't happen. So now my job is to be faithful and to do justice and only justice, and trust the Lord with the outcome. I may die and never see just legislation passed in Idaho. That is in the Lord's hands. I'm to do what's my job to do in front of me today.
Amen.
Well, and you're pushing, again, like you said, you're pushing the conversation, the concept of the Overton
At minimum.
window. It's shifting.
At minimum.
Right. There is fruit that's being born from this, because you're instructing. By you bringing this conversation up time after time, even if it fails multiple times before it succeeds, you are instructing the people who are in your hearing that they have to deal with this.
But
they can't just ignore it.
And this is not just happening in the legislature.
Yep.
This is happening in the legislature. I'm having conversations with other senators on almost a daily basis on this issue. But also, what's happening? Christians are getting active. They're sending letters. They're thinking about, how can I get involved? And so I think it's more than just that. This is hopefully even helping pastors say, I'm going to bring a message about this issue to my congregation. Maybe there are members in their congregation that haven't heard about the issue, and just they really don't have a position. So I think this it's in the Lord's hands what fruit he will bear from it. My position is that I'm the Lord's servant, and I will leave that to him. I will just be faithful with what he's given me to do.
Yeah. Well, and Jesus is Lord over all, right? That's what we proclaim. And so if he's Lord over all, he's Lord over the civil sphere as well. He's Lord over the state of Idaho. And so pastors, I think, for a long time have, I think, imbibed this weird thing that they can't ever address anything political. They need to be apolitical. And at the end of the day, the Word of God has a lot to say about the civil world and how we interact with it. And as Christian men, we need to be bold enough to speak to that. So Lord willing, men like yourself that are willing to bring this to the forefront is going to get, congregations talking. It's going to get people active. And Lord willing, it'll also embolden some pastors to speak up.
And I think another important thing as we pray about this, I think this sort of evangelical view of incrementalism, I think at times fails to have enough faith to ask God to do great things.
Amen.
To do big things.
Yep.
And so is this, as we've been preaching through the book of Exodus, as you just open your Bible and read the works of Jesus and so forth, tell me what's too hard for God.
Yeah.
And so we think of, well, it won't pass or it's not possible. How about we be
We'll
faithful?
have to fight a court battle.
And God can part the sea.
Yeah.
God can take the most powerful ruler of the earth, Pharaoh, and bring him to his knees. Mm-hmm. And he can do so with ease by his own almighty hand and power. And so will God's people be willing to pray bigger prayers to say, Lord, on the surface, on the pollsters tell me that this doesn't have a chance.
Yeah. But
they're not dealing with the God of the universe, wherein nothing is too hard for him. Mm-hmm. And so when we are seeking to be faithful, when we are humble before him, when we are willing to ask God to do what is by man impossible, then this type of justice, when it aligns with his will, is absolutely possible. And so we have to be prayerful. We have to be submissive and dependent. We don't command and force God to do what in our time, what we think is in our timing and in our purposes, what would be right. This is all within his purposes and sovereignty. But we want to pray according to his will. Yeah. And we know it is his will to protect the lives of image bearers of the Almighty. And so we know that we are pursuing a righteous thing. So then let's ask God to do an amazing and great thing. And we don't know. And if the Lord says, no, this is not my time, this is not my will at this time to bring it to pass, then we accept that from him and we come back next time. Yep. And we continue to do what is right, to be faithful, and we leave the results to him. But we trust in him that this corresponds with what his word teaches, and so we want to be pleasing to him.
I want to say one final thing that we're facing here on this issue is we cannot look at this from simply an earthly plane, a human level. There are spiritual forces at play here, and this child sacrifice is, in my opinion, probably the devil's favorite.
It's the sacrament of the devil.
It is.
Molech is still worshipped today.
And so this is what we're up against when I'm bringing these truths to bear upon the minds and hearts and consciences of senators and representatives, and we're bringing this issue forward. I'm not just facing opposition from people. I'm facing opposition from demonic forces, from spiritual forces that are opposed to the truth. They're opposed to God. They hate his image, and they love death. And so that's what I'm facing as well. So one thing that I would ask of the church is that as Moses had his arms held up by Aaron and Hur, right? I'm going to grow really weary. There are going to be days that are really burdensome, that are hard. I'm going to need to be constantly lifted up in prayer, supported in whatever way, whether it's, somebody showing up, saying hi, praying with me, whatever it might be. Those type of things are going to be huge, I think, for continued strength moving forward, because it's been 2 weeks, right? I've got a couple months to go, right? So and then we have next session, and then we'll see what the Lord does if I run again and get reelected. So it's going to be a long, drawn out task. And the other thing is, this podcast is going to testify against me if I start squishing out as a politician. So feel free to reach back into the archives in the future if you start to see me going the way of
all flesh,
and start to speak pragmatically and say, you know what, we've tried these things, Pastor, they just don't work, and so let's try something else. It's going to be a long, hard fight, but I need to be constantly reminded by faithful men that we have to keep speaking the truth, even if it feels like we're not making progress, because the Lord is the one who bears the fruit to it. So, and that's something that I might have that faith today, right? I need men to hold me accountable if I don't have that faith tomorrow.
Sometimes Elijah runs from Jezebel.
Yep, exactly.
And so
I anticipate it's going to happen to me is what I'm getting at.
A lot of times it gets framed as idealism versus realism. It's like, well, you're an idealist right now. Give it a few months and you'll be a realist. And it's like, well, that's actually an unnecessary and unhelpful category, right? No, you're pursuing righteousness. Yeah. Whether that happens ideally or not, you don't have to frame it that way. It's you need to pursue that, and you need people to continue to encourage you to pursue that.
Yeah. No, that's very good. Any other closing thoughts that you want to add in here before we wrap this up?
I don't think so.
All right.
I don't think so. I feel like I've rambled enough.
All right. Well, then that's all the time that we have for Truth today. We want to thank you for joining us. And until next time, we hope that you will grow in your love and commitment to Christ and his church as we are sanctified in the truth. God's word is truth.